evening. Welcome to Psychic Holistic Spotlight. I'm your host, Josie Way, and tonight we have co-hosting with me Ken Demers, and so there isn't a question. Our guest is Ken Gaus. So we have two Kens here. I'm outnumbered. One interesting thing about Ken sitting next to me is that he's a former member of our staff on Psychic Holistic Spotlight. And
many years ago.
Yes. Well, you've been with us for many years. I'm just a baby with about 20 years.
I've been doing this about 30.
Yeah.
Somewhere. We lost track, kind of.
Yeah. Ken, in his journey, has written an interesting book, and I will let him. What first drew you to the psychic world and the spiritual world?
Well, thank you, Josie. About 25 years ago, I had sort of an awakening, which I didn't really know what it was, but I was drawn to a spiritual path. And I was exploring all sorts of religion, spirituality, astrology, whatever I could get my hands on. And I ran into a woman named June, who was also a host here. And she did an astrological reading for me, and it said that I had a very unusual chart, and that at the age of 45, I would be opened up to my spiritual journey. So that was 1994, and that coincided with my spiritual awakening. And then for many years, I just was sort of bouncing around, trying to find answers to myself. Who am I? What am I supposed to be doing? I spent some time here with June, and I taped some shows. And then around 2000, I met a couple who we did a show on here, and I felt a real spiritual calling with them. They were from overseas. I felt that we were spiritually drawn together, and we formed a spiritual organization.
Oh, what was it called?
It was called the Healing Light Institute of Spirituality.
That sounds very interesting.
Yeah.
Ken?
Yeah, well, it was a nonprofit organization, and it was dedicated to healing people who that were in distress, and also to helping people find their way.
What forms of healing were you using?
There was hands-on healing, but mostly they were emphasizing spiritual communication. Get in touch with your soul.
With your soul.
With your soul and your spirit guide. And then every person needed to be directed individually. You know, what worked for you might not work for me, so there was different modalities for each person.
What was their name?
Chris and George Thompson. They came from Scotland.
Scotland, correct.
I don't know.
Yeah. That tape will be airing on YouTube in the very near future.
Right. I have two shows that I edited and taped with them. Shortly thereafter, I read a couple of books, Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls.
With Newton.
Michael Newton. This was a revelation to me. I thought, holy mackerel, what was I doing in a past life? What am I doing between lives? So in a pretty short period of time, about a year and a half, I had a past life regression, and then shortly following that, 3 between lives regressions, where you're taken back into the spirit world, and you basically see what's going on. Then over many years, lots of things going on my spiritual path. The spiritual organization folded up after a few years. And then around 2011, 2012, I had sort of just to be frank, I was sort of blown up by spirit. And everything in my life was swept away, relationships, money, every connection that I had. And I was told from going to see a psychic that this was part of my plan, and that this was to clear out my life so that I could become a spiritual communicator with a very simple message, which is similar to what I had learned before. And that message is you have an immortal soul, and it wants to have a dialogue with you. So I then tried to figure out different ways to spread this message. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I was directed to do by Spirit was to write this book. Mm-hmm. The book is called The Soul's Journey. And it's basically the story of my life. Mm-hmm. Sort of arbitrarily broken up into 10-year segments, 0 to 10, 10 to 20, etc., throughout my life. But what makes the book very different, and to be frank, somewhat controversial, is chapter 1 is my life from 0 to 10 as my ego mind experienced it. Mm-hmm. Chapter 2 is 0 to 10 as my soul experienced it.
Yeah, and as most of us have learned, when we go through enough experiences and we get to the other side, that some of the things that we thought were pretty awful actually gave us gifts of strengths and new awarenesses that we wouldn't have had we had a very placid life.
Well, absolutely, and that was certainly the case with me. As you go through the book in each decade, you start to see pretty clearly that my soul was virtually running the show. Mm. So why did I marry this person? Why did I have this career? Why did I move? All of it was part of a plan in order to move me along my journey to become a spiritual communicator. The rest of the book then has some chapters about suggestions on how to communicate with your soul, and then some of the problems that people have.
That's a curious concept, communicating with your soul, because basically you're talking to yourself.
Correct.
But on a different level of understanding and insight, I guess you would say.
Mm-hmm. Without the ego in the way.
Well, that's the trick.
That's real hard.
That's the trick. And various religions, particularly Buddhism, emphasize a great deal of meditation to sort of quiet your ego mind and then let your inner voice, your soul, come through. One of the things that I urge people to do or suggest people to do is to start thinking of yourself as two entities. There's the you that's in this body, you're going to work, you're working in the garden, whatever. And then there's this other complete entity, your soul, which I also recommend that you give a specific name. So my soul, for various reasons, is called Mary.
Called what?
Mary.
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 Okay.
Yeah. I have a sort of a strong attraction or an affinity for Mary Magdalene, so that was one of the reasons that my soul is named Mary. Now, actually, when you're communicating, spiritually communicating, you're either communicating with your soul or your spirit guide. Everyone has a spirit guide, and they're here to help you along your journey.
Can I interrupt?
Absolutely.
Once in a while, when I'm communicating with my soul or spirit guide, I actually contact the big guy. Sometimes God,
Which big guy?
God himself, the divine source. Sometimes I get an answer that goes above, it's so wise, it goes so far and beyond anything I've heard that I feel it has to come from someone way up there.
Well, there's an awful lot of levels above us.
Well, the point is, it doesn't really matter where the information is coming from, whether it's coming from your soul or a spirit guide or even a higher entity than that. Any information that you're getting is for your betterment. The betterment being the elevation of your soul. That's what we're basically all here to do, which is a little different than what we've learned in Western culture. Our culture is basically we're here to get more, have more fun, have more money, just have more.
It's funny. That may be what our culture tells us. But what I see that goes on, because I've worked with people at very basic levels who were applying for assistance as a social worker, and worked with people who were kind of wealthy. I see people as having certain issues. For me, I see people as having difficult, for instance, simple self-esteem, self-worth, having issues of control, and not so much of controlling others, but not knowing how to control and take care of themselves. That's what I see, and those are soul issues as well as physical survival issues. You know, it's not just the more and more, because I've progressed through each of my marriages with different control issues.
I'm a firm believer that we come into these different lifetimes to learn specific lessons and specific experiences. We might, if we have multiple marriages, in your other lifetimes, you might have been the spouse, or you might have been the child of a broken marriage, or you might have been the parent of a broken marriage.
Or I might have stayed in one marriage and been totally trapped.
That's one.
Unable to go anywhere.
That's another. Basically, I believe we're going to have many issues in our lifetimes, hundreds, thousands maybe, but each issue will be from a different side of the central issue that our soul is experiencing, and it wants to experience it from all different sides of the issue, so it has an understanding of it. It's like the Huna. They have multi-levels of wisdom, soul wisdom. The inner child, I can't remember what the middle one is, and then the ancient wise section of it. So even within ourselves, we have the different levels of wisdom within ourselves.
Yeah.
I agree. What I'm trying to do in terms of this spiritual communication and the message, again, you know, you have an immortal soul and it wants to have a dialogue with you. The biggest thing that your soul wants to communicate to you is, what are you supposed to be learning in this lifetime? What is your destiny? Everybody has a different destiny. I'm working in this lifetime on trust issues. So I came in, as Ken said, and I couldn't agree more, from past lives having trust issues, because I saw that in past life regressions. So many of my interactions, jobs, relationships have dealt with trust. So that's an issue that I'm working on. It's also manifested itself with me by being impatient. I wanted things to come quicker to me.
Well, that's society.
Well, again, for me, that was trust issues.
Yeah.
But I believe that there's no higher, in a sense, calling or no higher purpose than for you to find out what you're working on. Is it trust issues? Is it self-esteem? Is it fears from about something specific, water, or you drowned in a past life? When you can start to figure those things out, you start to see, oh, now I understand why I have this relationship, why I have this job. And then you can start to hopefully heal yourself.
Now, do you find, which way do you find the best to find these issues? Going within yourself through a form of meditation, or going to see her and she does a past life reading on you, or an Akashic record reading on you, or which is the best way to open the door?
All of them.
all of them. Which is the best way to start opening the doors?
Well, the best way to start and ongoing is your own intuition. Believe that you can communicate with your soul. I just had a discussion with someone the other day, and that was termed your gut feeling. What is your gut telling you? And this woman said, whenever I go against my gut, whatever I'm doing, relationship, job, money, doesn't work out for me because I didn't listen to my gut feeling. So initially I would say to everybody, try to foster that, try to believe in it. Don't ignore it.
Yeah.
But getting back to your question, I use a term called triangulation. And that is, I try to get messages from a lot of different modalities, particularly ones that are outside of me.
Different options.
Different options. And if 2 or 3 or 4 people are saying to me, Ken, why don't you go over here? Or why don't you do this? That's what I feel Spirit is trying to tell me as what the direction is. So when I put those together, ask my gut, I'm trying to triangulate from a lot of different angles to get to what the next step is.
Yeah. I know for me it was hard because the message was that I was to reach out beyond myself to as many different sources, angels, ascended masters, native spirits, so that I could come back and tell people that we're not alone, and there's lots and lots of help and guidance for us to follow. And with my power issues, it's okay to trust Spirit. And then you're not just trusting in your gut, you're trusting in your heart.
Of course.
You trust all those things. You have a working knowledge of you have a knowledge of how to work with them, deal with them, extract information from them. But when you're dealing with one of the clients, say, that
they
come in
didn't
for a
always.
reading, do they have that same trust just because you say it's there and it's good? You know what I'm saying? Do
I give them pointers about signs. I ask Spirit what avenues they should look to for further information, what avenues, what gifts they possess that they can start opening.
Most people are in denial about that.
Well, if they hear it from enough people,
That's the key.
I
That's
just
right.
plant the seed,
That's all you can do.
and someone will water it.
Well, what I'm trying to primarily do with this communication is to provide a vehicle or a means for people to really heal themselves and make the changes that they need in life. And what I was introduced to from my previous spiritual group, which I'm now using also, is something that I call a spiritual development circle. And this is a small group, 4, 5, 6 people that meet a couple of times a month, maybe for 2 hours. And there's a discussion about a spiritual book, but then we also spend time with a deck of cards. We spend time doing some healing, and people share what's going on in their lives spiritually. So this is, I've used this analogy, this is sort of like Alcoholics Anonymous on steroids. And you're encouraged to come to the group and open up. Everything is confidential. There's no charge, there's no money involved in this. I'm not collecting any money. It's not designed to be a money maker. But people are then, within a matter of a few months, they usually have a good understanding of what they're supposed to be doing in this lifetime. Now, whether they start making the changes or not, that's a different story.
It's challenging.
It is.
But once you make a few and it works,
Right.
you're definitely encouraged to do more changes.
But if you're just starting this into this field of I call myself a paranormal groupie. So if you're starting into this field like he's talking about, and you're getting information on this level, and you think, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be learning, and then as you learn that, you find out, well, that's only a small part of.
Yeah.
So you got to be. Are people aware that there's multiple steps in the process?
Initially, they're not aware, because ultimately, you wind up giving your life to a divine source to guide you. You go with the flow. One additionally good book is Mickey Singer's or Michael Singer's book, The Surrender Experiment.
I've heard of it.
And it documents how he went through some really, really unusual stuff, letting go more and more of his ego, and not hating his ego, recognizing his ego as a valuable tool, but
it serves the purpose.
That serves the soul.
Of course. And that's what it's supposed to do. Your ego mind was designed to serve the soul, not vice versa. Unfortunately, in our society, most people are caught up in their linear ego mind lives, and they're not even really aware of the soul, what they're supposed to be doing. But there's becoming more and more of an awakening, and I'm finding more and more people who are interested in finding out, what am I supposed to be doing here?
Yeah.
What am I supposed to be learning?
Well, there are many people who have been reading Conversations with God and realizing that the God they were raised to believe is not a punitive God.
Right.
It is the reason bad things happen to us is not punishment. Sometimes they're the consequences of things we've done, and other times they are opportunities to grow.
Of course.
We had a guest one time who had, I can't even remember who it was. I think he had multiple near-death experiences.
Yes, I know who he is.
And we got in a conversation about illnesses. And I said, we basically choose the basic path of our lifetimes, which includes these very, very severe illnesses so that we can learn lessons from them. And he got super upset with the concept that we might be choosing all this suffering on purpose.
Yeah. People have a hard time with that. If you read Michael Newton's books, when you're in the spirit world, you're given a choice of maybe 2 or 3 different lives. You don't have choices of thousands of lives.
No.
They understand what lives you need, they being higher spiritual forces. And you get a preview of that life. And you see that there's going to be a lot of hardship. And you make the decision, okay, I'm going to come or I'm not going to come, and maybe it's too difficult for you. But I agree, Ken. I think most of these things are scripted. And as you said also, Josie, most of them are there for our benefit and to learn from.
Yeah.
Of course, our ego mind is screaming at us that, the house burned down or I went into bankruptcy. Well, from a soul's perspective, it's just a tremendous learning opportunity.
It doesn't matter.
From a soul perspective, it doesn't
point of
matter.
view.
Exactly.
Well, I don't know how the Buddhists would say it, but it would be something like, when you wipe everything away,
Right.
and there's nothing left, there you are, there's your soul.
That's it.
You don't need anything else. You still exist without all the things.
Yeah. There's one other point, when I say that you have an immortal soul, people frankly have a hard time with this, and that means reincarnation is real. You've had past lives. In order to have had past lives, you have to have reincarnated back into this life. And I think from old spiritual teachings and what our society says, for people just to accept the concept of reincarnation, it's hard.
Well, I look at
Church
it.
changed that, though. It used to be incorporated in most of the religions. There was an
It still is,
understanding.
but they don't like that viewpoint, so they say that's not true. But basically, I look at it this way. God is what you would call immortal. There's no beginning, there's no past, there's only present. So because we are a small speck of that infinite intelligence that is God, that soul that is within us has no past, no presence, no future, whatever. It's only present. So that it's like Nostradamus. People wonder, well, how could, or the Jules Verne, how could people see this? It's because they have the ability to connect to their soul in other time frames. They don't get a clear picture of it because they're not a clear channel. Some people are. And then they can see all these glimpses of what the past is going to look like or what the future is going to look like, because they're looking at it from the present, which may or may not have the understanding of these things.
Yeah.
The soul, as I understand it, is pure and indestructible.
That's my experience from having crossed over. And as I say in my book, the soul is basically androgynous. Mm-hmm. There is no male or female connected with it, except that it will take on a male or female persona to help people hear with a communication aspect.
I think you should give us a definition of when I passed over. What does that mean?
Well, when I did my past life regression and my between lives regression, you go through a hypnotism process, which is anywhere from a half an hour to an hour long. And you're hypnotized deeper and deeper and deeper. This is all described in Michael Newton's books. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden it's like you pop out on the other side and then you're there. Now you have to have a very competent facilitator who then guides you around the afterlife, and then you ask questions, you see what you do in the afterlife, you see the type of soul essence that you have.
Give us an example of what you were doing in the between lives periods.
Well, for me, most of my between lives periods is spent with education, getting my own education and educating other souls, trying to help other souls
so that they can come back into the physical
with a greater understanding, and hopefully not to repeat the same mistakes.
That seems from my hobby of dealing with people and that stuff, that seems to be the common underlying lessons and accomplishments and goals.
Yeah.
To do just what you said.
Yeah. Well, that was certainly my experience, and it was great to cross over. I went in with each session with a list of questions, and they were always answered.
Yeah, you're supposed to.
I didn't like some of the answers.
Well,
That's a given.
Yeah.
especially when they said, "Oh no, you're doing that lesson over because you didn't do it right."
That's exactly right.
Well,
That's exactly right.
But you and everyone have the same issue.
Of course.
but
We're not perfect.
I had multiple lifetimes with the Christ. And
Okay.
what he used to teach
We're almost
is not
done.
what the Christian church is teaching now.
Yes. Thank you very much for joining us on this discussion of our soul with Ken Demers and Ken Gaus and myself. Please join us again. Now, please finish what you were saying.
Christ had a very divine point of view, and he had certain lessons. And the people followed him, kind of changed those lessons to fit the teachings of the church. And they're not, the ones that are teaching are not necessarily divine people.